October 7th, 1944. The rain-soaked fields near Overloon, Netherlands. Sergeant James McBride hunched inside his M4A1 Sherman, watching through the periscope as German Panthers materialized from the morning mist 300 yards distant. Standard doctrine demanded he halt, let the gyroscope settle, acquire the target, then fire. But McBride's stabilizer was engaged. His gunner, Corporal Eddie Martinez, had spent the past 3 weeks learning something the manual barely explained, and most crews had disconnected as useless. The Sherman lurched forward at 12 miles per hour over cratered ground. Martinez kept his eye pressed to the sight. The crosshairs bounced, settled, bounced again, as the hydraulic system fought to compensate for every jolt and rock of the suspension. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The German Panther commander saw the American tank advancing and made his own calculation. Shermans always stopped to shoot. He had 5, perhaps 10 seconds to acquire his target and destroy the lighter American tank before it could return accurate fire. He was catastrophically wrong. Martinez pressed the firing pedal. The 75mm gun roared. The Sherman's deck plates shuddered, but the stabilized gun barely moved in elevation. The armor-piercing round struck the Panther's gun mantlet at 2,000 feet per second. Secondary detonation followed instantly as ready ammunition cooked off inside the German turret. McBride's tank never stopped moving. The crew had done something most American tankers believed impossible. They had fired accurately on the move, exploiting a technological advantage that had been built into every Sherman since 1941, but remained largely unused, widely misunderstood, and in some units, explicitly forbidden. The story of how this capability was unlocked begins not with engineering breakthroughs or command decisions, but with the gradual, unauthorized, and often technically illegal process by which combat veterans learned to manipulate a system their own army had classified as secret and failed to properly explain. What neither the American crews who mastered this technology, nor the German tankers who died facing it fully understood, was that the Westinghouse gyrostabilizer represented one of the most significant technological advantages of war, not because of what it could do on paper, but because of the psychological transformation it enabled once crews learned its proper use. The Germans would never develop comparable technology during the war, not because they lacked the engineering capability, but because their entire tactical doctrine rejected firing on the move as wasteful and inaccurate. American tankers would prove that doctrine obsolete, but only after overcoming their own army's institutional resistance to teaching them how. The technology that would transform armored warfare sat inside McBride's turret in 1944, the same way it had sat inside hundreds of Shermans at Kasserine Pass in 1943. The difference was not the equipment. The difference was that by late 1944, scattered throughout the American armored divisions fighting across France and Belgium, certain crews had figured out what others had not. They had learned to make the stabilizer work, and they had learned it in direct violation of the security classification that surrounded the system. In early 1941, when Westinghouse engineers first installed gyroscopic stabilization systems on M3 medium tanks, the United States Army classified the technology as confidential. The gyrostabilizer used a spinning flywheel mounted in a gimbal assembly to detect changes in the gun's elevation. When the tank hull moved, the gyroscope remained oriented to true horizontal. Hydraulic servos measured the difference between the gyro's orientation and the gun's position, then applied correcting force to keep the gun pointed at the original elevation. The principle was elegant, the execution was complex, and the security classification meant that maintenance manuals were restricted, training materials were incomplete, and most tank crews received Shermans equipped with stabilizers. They had no idea how to operate properly. The Westinghouse system installed on early production, Shermans required careful calibration. The gyroscope needed to spin up to operating speed before engagement. Hydraulic pressure had to be maintained within specific tolerances. The electrical connections running from the turret through the slip ring to the hull required perfect continuity. Any loose wire, any pressure leak, any deviation from proper procedure would cause the system to hunt, oscillating wildly as the servos overcorrected, and when a stabilizer hunted, it was worse than useless. The gun would jerk up and down, unpredictably. Aiming became impossible. Frustrated crews across North Africa in 1942 and 43 reached the obvious conclusion. The stabilizer did not work. Better to disconnect it entirely. This conclusion was reinforced by incomplete training. Most American tank units in 1942 received their Shermans, received a technical manual whose sections on the gyrostabilizer were marked confidential and therefore could not be openly discussed, and deployed overseas with minimal instruction on a system whose very existence they were not supposed to acknowledge to enemy forces. The British, receiving thousands of Shermans through Lend-Lease, took one look at the maintenance requirements and disabled the stabilizers entirely on most of their tanks. British doctrine emphasized shooting from static positions with careful aim. The complexity of keeping the American stabilizer functional did not justify the marginal benefit, as they understood it. Soviet tankers, receiving M4A1 Shermans through Lend-Lease, similarly showed little interest in the stabilizer system. Soviet doctrine, like German doctrine, emphasized firing from halted positions. The T-34's excellent mobility was used to achieve firing positions quickly, then stop and engage. The concept of firing accurately while moving struck Soviet tank commanders as wasteful of ammunition and contrary to established practice. Only American crews, operating under American doctrine that emphasized aggressive maneuver, had reason to master the stabilizer. But even among American units, adoption was spotty and inconsistent. The 2nd Armored Division, fighting in Tunisia in early 1943, included some crews who swore by the stabilizer and others who had disconnected it. The difference was not random. Crews who had trained extensively in the United States before deployment, who had received proper instruction from factory representatives or experienced maintenance personnel, understood how to use the system. They knew to power up the gyro 30 seconds before engagement. They knew to maintain hydraulic pressure and check electrical continuity daily. New crews, rushed through abbreviated training and shipped overseas as replacements, knew none of this. They climbed into Shermans whose previous crews had disabled the stabilizers and had no idea the system even existed until someone mentioned it casually. The security classification made systematic instruction impossible. Officers could not openly discuss classified equipment in training environments. Technical representatives from Westinghouse, who accompanied some units to provide maintenance support, were forbidden from publishing detailed instructions that might fall into enemy hands. The result was that by mid-1943, the American armored force possessed a technological capability that most of its tank crews did not know how to use, did not trust, and in many cases had deliberately disabled. The Germans, analyzing captured Shermans, found the stabilizer system and recognized its sophistication. German engineers understood gyroscopic principles. The Kriegsmarine used gyroscopic systems for naval fire control. German aircraft manufacturers employed gyroscopic instruments for navigation and bombing. The technology itself was not mysterious. What puzzled German intelligence officers was why the Americans would install such a complex system on a mass-produced tank. The maintenance burden seemed excessive. The benefit seemed marginal. German tank doctrine, refined through years of combat on the Eastern Front and in North Africa, emphasized accurate first-shot kills from carefully selected firing positions. German tanks did not shoot on the move because moving shots wasted ammunition and revealed position without achieving results. This doctrinal assumption was so deeply embedded that when German engineers examined the Sherman stabilizer, they concluded it was an interesting but impractical American excess. The kind of over-engineering Americans were famous for. Germany would not develop similar technology because Germany did not need it. German gunners, properly trained, did not miss when shooting from stationary positions. This belief would prove fatal. The transformation began quietly in Italy during the winter of 1943 and 44. The terrain was mountainous, the weather abysmal, the roads few and treacherous. American tank units supporting the grinding advance northward faced German defensive positions expertly sited to cover approach roads. A Sherman commander approaching a German strongpoint faced impossible choices. Advance slowly, giving German anti-tank guns time to aim carefully. Advance quickly, sacrificing the ability to shoot back. Or stop at a visible position, become a stationary target, and hope to achieve a first-round hit before German return fire destroyed the tank. None of these options were acceptable to Sergeant Frank Morrison of the 1st Armoured Division. Morrison was a veteran who had fought across North Africa. His Sherman had been one of the minority that retained an operational stabilizer because Morrison's crew chief, Technical Sergeant Robert Chen, understood the system and kept it maintained. Chen had worked as an electrician before the war. When his unit received Shermans in 1942, he read every technical manual cover to cover, including the confidential sections on the gyrostabilizer. Other crews in his battalion complained about stabilizer problems. Chen's tank never had problems because Chen checked the system daily, traced every electrical connection monthly, and bled the hydraulic lines regularly to prevent air bubbles that would cause pressure fluctuations. Morrison trusted his equipment because Chen maintained it properly. In January 1944, Morrison's platoon was tasked with clearing a German roadblock near Casino. Intelligence reported at least 2 German anti-tank guns covering the approach. Standard doctrine called for infantry to clear the position before tanks advanced. But the infantry was pinned down. The battalion commander needed the road open immediately. Morrison's platoon advanced. The lead Sherman halted 300 yards from the German position, fired, missed. German return fire disabled the tank. The second Sherman halted, fired, achieved a hit, but the German gun was dug in behind concrete and shrugged off the 75mm round. Return fire knocked out the second Sherman. Morrison, commanding the third tank, made a decision that violated every element of established doctrine. He ordered his driver to advance at maximum speed. He ordered his gunner to engage the stabilizer. He told his crew they were not stopping. The Sherman accelerated to 25 miles per hour. The gunner, Corporal Vincent Delgado, had trained with Morrison since North Africa. He knew the stabilizer was engaged, properly because Chen had checked it that morning. Delgado centered the crosshairs on the German gun position and waited. The hydraulic servos hummed. The gun barrel moved fractionally up and down as the suspension compressed and extended over rough ground, but the crosshairs remained approximately on target. At 200 yards, Delgado fired. The round struck within 2 feet of the German gun shield. German crew scrambled to track the rapidly moving target. Delgado loaded another round. The loader, Private First Class James Wu, had this down to a 4-second cycle. The Sherman was still accelerating, 150 yards. Delgado fired again, direct hit on the gun shield. The German gun fell silent. The second German anti-tank position fired at Morrison's moving Sherman and missed. The shell passed behind the tank. Morrison ordered a hard left turn. The Sherman's driver complied. The tank pivoted, still moving at 20 miles per hour. Delgado kept the stabilizer engaged, tracked to the second gun position, fired. Another hit. Morrison's tank survived. The roadblock was cleared. The battalion advanced. That night, Morrison's company commander asked him how he had done it. Morrison explained the stabilizer. The company commander had assumed the system did not work because most crews in the battalion had disabled their stabilizers. Morrison explained that it worked if you maintained it properly and knew how to use it. The company commander ordered Morrison to teach the other crews in the company. Morrison and Chen spent the next 2 weeks conducting informal classes for tank crews, explaining gyroscope spin-up procedures, hydraulic maintenance, electrical continuity checks, and firing techniques. This instruction was technically illegal. The stabilizer system remained classified. Morrison had no authority to provide training on classified equipment. Chen, as an enlisted man, had no authority to interpret technical manuals marked confidential. But combat, effectiveness trumped security regulations. The company commander looked the other way. Within a month, half the tanks in Morrison's battalion were operating with stabilizers engaged. Combat reports began noting increased hit rates against German positions during approach maneuvers. Tank crews discovered they could engage German anti-tank guns while advancing, forcing German crews to choose between tracking a moving target or taking cover from incoming fire. The psychological impact was significant. German anti-tank gunners were trained to wait for American tanks to halt, then fire at a stationary target. When American tanks did not halt but instead continued advancing while returning fire, German gunners faced an unexpected tactical problem. Their training had not prepared them for this. Similar developments were occurring independently in other American units. The 3rd Armoured Division in England, preparing for the Normandy invasion, included some crews who understood stabilizer operation. The 4th Armoured Division, training in the United States before deployment, had several maintenance officers who insisted on keeping stabilizers operational. But these remained isolated examples. Most American tank crews deploying to Normandy in June 1944 had non-functional or disabled stabilizers. The official Army position remained ambiguous. Technical manuals described the system. Training materials barely mentioned it. Security classifications prevented open discussion. The result was that on D-Day, the majority of American Shermans that landed on Utah and Omaha beaches possessed a technological advantage their crews did not know how to use. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The hedgerows of Normandy in June and July 1944 created terrain that nullified most of the Shermans' advantages. The narrow lanes between ancient earthen banks topped with dense vegetation channeled American armor into killing zones where German anti-tank guns waited in carefully prepared positions. American tanks could not maneuver. They could not use their speed. They advanced slowly down sunken roads until German fire destroyed them. In this environment, the stabilizer seemed irrelevant. Most combat occurred at ranges under 100 yards, where any competent gunner could hit a stationary target. American tank commanders learned to advance cautiously, halt at corners, edge forward until the gun could bear, then engage. The stabilizer, even when functional, provided no advantage when tanks moved at 3 miles per hour through muddy lanes barely wide enough for a single vehicle. But by late July 1944, when American forces finally broke out of the Normandy bocage and advanced into more open country, the tactical situation changed dramatically. Operation Cobra shattered German defensive lines. American armored divisions raced across France. Tank columns advanced 50, 60, 70 miles in single days. The speed of the advance created new tactical problems and new opportunities. Staff Sergeant Thomas Kowalski's Sherman, part of the 2nd Armored Division's push toward Avranches, encountered a German rearguard position on a hilltop overlooking the approach road. Standard tactics called for halting, calling for artillery support, waiting for infantry to clear the position. But Kowalski's battalion commander wanted the road open immediately. Delay meant allowing retreating German forces to establish new defensive positions further east. Kowalski had learned about stabilizer operation from another crew in his company whose tank commander had fought in Italy. The instruction had been informal, technically unauthorized, and remarkably effective. Kowalski's gunner, Corporal David Schwartz, had practiced firing with the stabilizer engaged during the static period before the breakout. They had not told their platoon leader about these experiments. Security regulations still technically classified the stabilizer system. Advancing toward the German position, Kowalski ordered the stabilizer engaged. The Sherman accelerated to 15 miles per hour. Schwartz acquired the German anti-tank gun in his sight picture. The gyroscope hummed. The gun remained approximately level despite the tank's movement over uneven ground. At 400 yards, Schwartz fired. The high-explosive round struck 20 feet left of the German position. Rapid adjustment. Second round at 350 yards. Direct hit on the gun shield. The German crew abandoned their position. Kowalski's tank continued advancing without stopping. The road was clear. The battalion advanced. That evening, Kowalski's platoon leader asked how he had achieved a hit while moving. Kowalski explained the stabilizer. The platoon leader, Lieutenant Robert Hayes, had assumed the stabilizer was not functional on most tanks in his platoon. Hayes had received minimal training on the system during his abbreviated officer course stateside. He had never seen it demonstrated effectively in combat. Hayes asked Kowalski to brief the other tank commanders in the platoon. That night, parked in a French field near Avranches, Kowalski explained gyroscope spin-up procedures, hydraulic maintenance requirements, and firing techniques. 3 other crews in the platoon had disconnected their stabilizers entirely. Kowalski explained how to reconnect them and check for proper operation. Within the platoon, an institutional culture began shifting. Crews who had dismissed the stabilizer as useless began experimenting with it. Maintenance personnel who had ignored the system began checking hydraulic pressure and electrical continuity. Gunners who had never fired with the stabilizer engaged began practicing during advances. This pattern repeated across multiple American armored units during the August 1944 breakout. Combat veterans who understood stabilizer operation taught others. Maintenance crews learned to keep the systems functional. Commanders who had previously discouraged stabilizer use began recognizing its tactical value. The second-generation Shermans entering combat in July and August 1944 incorporated an improved stabilizer design. The new system, installed on the large hatch 75mm tanks and all 76mm armed variants, simplified calibration procedures and improved reliability. The electrical connections were more robust. The hydraulic servos were more precise. The system still required proper maintenance and training, but it was more forgiving of minor neglect. Units receiving these improved Shermans found that crews adapted to stabilizer use more rapidly. The new tanks arrived with technical bulletins that, while still officially classified, provided more detailed operational guidance than earlier manuals. Maintenance officers, who had struggled with first-generation stabilizers, found the improved system easier to keep operational. Technical Sergeant Robert Chen, the electrician from 1st Armored Division who had maintained Morrison's stabilizer through the Italian campaign, received a transfer to 3rd Army Maintenance Section in August 1944. His new assignment was to visit tank battalions and provide technical instruction on stabilizer maintenance. The assignment was unofficial. No orders specified this duty. But senior maintenance officers recognized that Chen possessed knowledge most crews lacked. Chen traveled between tank battalions, explaining electrical troubleshooting, hydraulic system maintenance, and proper operation procedures. He demonstrated how to test gyroscope spin-up speed using a stopwatch and observing gun barrel movement. He showed maintenance crews how to identify air bubbles in hydraulic lines that caused pressure fluctuations. He explained that loose electrical connections through the turret slip ring were the most common cause of stabilizer failure. This instruction remained technically illegal. The gyrostabilizer system was still classified. Chen was disseminating classified technical information without proper authorization, but combat effectiveness justified the violation. Battalion maintenance officers who learned from Chen's instruction saw stabilizer functionality rates in their units increase from 20% to 70% within weeks. The German perspective on these developments revealed a fundamental doctrinal blindness. German tank crews encountering Shermans that fired accurately while moving initially attributed this to luck. A moving tank cannot shoot accurately. This was established doctrine confirmed by German experience on the Eastern Front, where neither German nor Soviet tanks attempted to fire accurately on the move. When multiple encounters demonstrated that American tanks could achieve consistent hits while moving at speed, German intelligence officers sought explanations. Reports from tank commanders who survived engagements with American armor described Sherman crews firing before halting, sometimes achieving hits, sometimes missing but forcing German crews to take evasive action. German engineers examining captured Shermans in September 1944 found the gyrostabilizer system and understood its purpose. Technical reports forwarded to German Armaments Ministry noted the sophistication of the American design but concluded that the system was unnecessary. German doctrine emphasized first-shot kills from prepared positions. German tanks did not need stabilization because German tanks did not shoot while moving. This conclusion was reinforced by testing captured Shermans. German test crews firing the Sherman with stabilizer engaged achieved inconsistent results. Sometimes the system worked, Sometimes it hunted wildly. The German test crews had no training in proper operation procedures. They did not know to check hydraulic pressure or electrical continuity. They did not understand that the gyroscope required 30 seconds to spin up to operating speed. They concluded the system was unreliable. German tank doctrine had been refined over 4 years of combat. The Panzer IV's excellent gun and adequate armour allowed German crews to achieve kills from 1,500 metres when firing from prepared positions. The Panther's powerful 75mm gun could destroy any Allied tank at 2,000 metres. Why would these advantages be sacrificed by firing while moving? The answer was that German tanks rarely got the luxury of prepared positions by late 1944. The strategic situation forced German armoured units into mobile defence, fighting delaying actions, conducting tactical retreats. In this environment, the ability to fire accurately while moving provided decisive advantage. American Sherman crews who had mastered stabilizer operation could engage German positions while advancing, forcing German crews to return fire at moving targets. German gunners trained to engage stationary targets at long range found their skills less applicable when targets refused to halt. The psychological impact was significant. A German Panther crew near Aracourt in September 1944 reported encountering American Shermans that fired while advancing at speed. The German commander, expecting the American tanks to halt before shooting, delayed his own fire to ensure a first-round kill. The Sherman fired first while still moving. The round missed but forced the Panther crew to button up and traverse to engage. By the time the German gunner acquired the target, the Sherman had fired again. This round struck the Panther's gun mantlet. The German crew bailed out. After the engagement, the Panther commander reported to his battalion headquarters that American tanks possessed a new fire control system that allowed accurate shooting while moving. German intelligence officers investigating this report examined the destroyed Panther and found the impact point on the mantlet. The shot placement suggested aimed fire, not lucky hits. Reports accumulated through September and October 1944. Multiple German tank commanders described similar encounters. American tanks advancing while firing, shots that should have been wildly inaccurate achieving hits or near misses. German crews forced to engage moving targets without adequate training for this tactical situation. German Armaments Ministry received these reports and conducted another evaluation. Could Germany develop similar stabilization technology for the Panther and Tiger? The technical capability existed. German industry could manufacture gyroscopes and hydraulic servos, but the resources required were substantial. The Panther production line was already strained. Adding a complex stabilization system would reduce output and increase maintenance requirements. More critically, German doctrine still rejected firing on the move as wasteful. Even if Panthers were equipped with stabilizers, would German crews use them? Training programs would need revision. Maintenance personnel would need instruction. Ammunition expenditure would increase as crews fired more rounds per engagement. The decision was made to not develop stabilization technology for German tanks. Germany would continue emphasizing accurate fire from stationary positions. This was the correct doctrine, based on established principles of tank warfare. The fact that American crews were achieving success with stabilizers did not invalidate German doctrine. It merely demonstrated that Americans wasted ammunition and got occasionally lucky. This assessment was catastrophically wrong. By December 1944, American tank units across Europe included significant numbers of crews who operated their stabilizers effectively. The percentage varied by unit. Some battalions had stabilizer functionality rates above 80%. Others remained below 30%. But the trend was clear. More American tankers understood how to use the system. More maintenance crews kept it operational. More commanders recognized its tactical value. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 and January 1945 provided the most dramatic demonstration of stabilizer effectiveness. German armoured spearheads advancing through the Ardennes encountered American tank units forced into hasty defensive positions. The weather was miserable, visibility was poor, combat occurred at close range in forested terrain. Staff Sergeant Joseph Berkowitz's Sherman, part of the 9th Armoured Division defending near Bastogne, encountered a German Panther advancing down a forest road in early, morning fog. The range was less than 200 yards. Berkowitz's crew had their stabilizer engaged. His driver saw the Panther first, and immediately began backing the Sherman behind a building. The Sherman was moving in reverse at 8 miles per hour. The gunner, Corporal Raymond Foster, kept the sight on the Panther's hull as visible through the fog. The stabilizer compensated for the movement. Foster fired while the tank was still backing up. The round struck the Panther's driver's compartment. The German tank stopped, disabled. Berkowitz's crew survived because they fired accurately while moving. A stationary engagement at that range would have favored the Panther's superior armor and gun. Movement combined with stabilized fire allowed the Sherman crew to achieve a hit before the German crew could return fire effectively. Similar engagements occurred throughout the Bulge fighting. American crews who understood stabilizer operation used it to engage German armor while maneuvering. German crews expecting American tanks to halt before firing found themselves taking hits from moving targets. The German perspective during the Bulge revealed complete failure to understand what they faced. German tank commanders reported that American crews had improved their training and now achieved hits more quickly. Some German officers attributed this to better crew quality. Others suggested Americans had received new ammunition with improved accuracy. The actual explanation, that American tanks possessed working stabilization systems and German tanks did not, never entered German tactical analysis. German doctrine so thoroughly rejected firing on the move that German officers could not conceptualize this as the source of American advantage. By January 1945, American Army Ordnance conducted formal testing to evaluate stabilizer effectiveness. The tests compared Shermans with stabilizers engaged versus Shermans firing from halt. The results were dramatic. At ranges from 300 to 1,200 yards, Sherman crews using stabilizers while moving at 15 miles per hour achieved 70% hit probability on tank-sized targets. Crews firing from halt after stopping achieved 85% hit probability. The 15% reduction in accuracy was more than compensated by the tactical advantage of continuous movement. The testing confirmed what combat veterans already knew. The stabilizer worked when properly maintained and correctly operated. Crews trained in its use could fire accurately while moving at speeds up to 15 miles per hour over moderately rough terrain. This capability provided decisive advantage in fluid combat, where stopping meant becoming a target. The testing also revealed that stabilizer effectiveness declined rapidly at speeds above 15 miles per hour or over very rough terrain. The hydraulic servos could not compensate for violent suspension movement. Crews attempting to fire at full speed over crater fields achieved hit rates below 20%. The system had limits, but within those limits, the capability was revolutionary. No other nation had fielded comparable technology in operational tanks during World War II. British engineers had experimented with stabilization but deployed it only in post-war tanks. Soviet designers developed stabilizers but did not produce them in quantity until after the war. German engineers never seriously attempted to develop the technology during wartime. The Sherman's Westinghouse gyrostabilizer remained unique among World War II tanks, and by early 1945, a significant percentage of American tank crews understood how to use it. Part 3. The Cost of Truth. The final months of the war in Europe demonstrated both the potential and the limitations of stabilized fire. American armored divisions racing across Germany in March and April 1945 used their mobility advantage aggressively. Tank columns advanced rapidly, bypassing German strongpoints, cutting supply lines, creating chaos in German rear areas. In this environment, the ability to fire while moving allowed American crews to engage targets of opportunity without slowing their advance. German anti-tank guns positioned to ambush halted tanks found themselves taking fire from Shermans that refused to stop. German infantry armed with Panzerfausts discovered that American tanks moving at 15 miles per hour were difficult targets, and those tanks could return fire accurately while moving. Sergeant Frank Morrison's crew, the veteran unit from Italy that had pioneered stabilizer use in combat, participated in the crossing of the Rhine in March 1945. Morrison's battalion had achieved nearly 90% stabilizer functionality by this point. Maintenance crews understood the system, gunners trained regularly in stabilized firing, tank commanders incorporated movement and fire into their tactical planning. Morrison's Sherman crossed the Rhine on a pontoon bridge under German artillery fire. The far bank was contested. German infantry with anti-tank rockets held positions in buildings overlooking the bridgehead. Standard tactics called for infantry to clear the buildings before tanks advanced, but infantry support was delayed. Morrison ordered his driver forward at maximum safe speed, 20 miles per hour. His gunner, still Corporal Vincent Delgado, after nearly 2 years of combat together, engaged the stabilizer. They identified a building window where a Panzerfaust team was visible. Delgado fired high explosive while the Sherman was moving at speed. The round struck the building facade. Second round. Direct hit through the window. The German team was neutralized. Morrison's tank continued advancing, firing at multiple targets, never stopping. German defenders, expecting American tanks to halt and fire, found themselves facing a moving target that shot back accurately. The psychological impact demoralized German infantry, who had been told that Panzerfausts were effective tank killers. Effective against stationary tanks, perhaps. Against moving tanks that fired back while advancing, the Panzerfaust was far less useful. By April 1945, German tank crews understood that American Shermans possessed some capability for accurate fire while moving, but German tactical doctrine had not adapted. German training still emphasized firing from prepared positions. German commanders still positioned their tanks in static defensive positions to maximize the advantage of the Panthers' superior gun and armor. This doctrine was obsolete, but German military institutions lacked the flexibility to change it. German tank schools still taught the techniques that had worked on the Eastern Front in 1942 and 43. The tactical reality of 1945, where German tanks fought desperately mobile defensive actions against an enemy with air superiority and overwhelming numbers, required different doctrine. But doctrine does not change quickly, especially in a military-facing collapse. German tank crews in April 1945 fought using the tactics they had been taught, even when those tactics no longer worked. They positioned their Panthers in hull-down positions covering approach routes, waiting for American tanks to advance into range, expecting those tanks to halt before firing. American Sherman crews advancing with stabilizers engaged did not halt. They fired while moving. The first indication a German crew had that an American tank was engaging was the impact of the first round. Sometimes that round missed. Sometimes it achieved a hit. Either way, the German crew was forced to react to fire from a moving target, a tactical situation their training had not prepared them for. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. In the final weeks, American armored forces achieved remarkable advances with minimal FARF losses, considering the distances covered and the intensity of combat. The Sherman's stabilized gun was one factor among many contributing to this success. Air superiority, artillery support, overwhelming numerical advantage, and superior logistics all mattered more strategically, but at the tactical level, in individual crew versus crew engagements, the stabilizer provided a genuine advantage. American crews who understood how to use it survived encounters that might have killed them. German crews who never faced stabilizer-equipped Shermans never understood what advantage they had been spared. After the war, American Army Ordnance conducted comprehensive evaluations of tank performance. The gyrostabilizer received specific attention. Surveys of tank commanders revealed that units with high stabilizer functionality rates reported greater confidence in their ability to engage enemy armor. Crews who had used the stabilizer in combat overwhelmingly rated it as valuable. The minority of crews who rated the stabilizer as useless or unreliable shared common characteristics. They had received minimal training on the system. Their maintenance personnel had not kept it functional. They had attempted to use it without understanding proper procedures. Their negative assessments reflected lack of training, not technological failure. The post-war analysis concluded that the Westinghouse gyrostabilizer was highly effective when properly maintained and correctly operated. The system's primary limitation was not technological, but institutional. The Army had failed to provide adequate training. The security classification had prevented open discussion and systematic instruction. The result was that many crews never learned to use a capability their tanks possessed. Recommendations included declassifying the stabilizer system, incorporating comprehensive stabilizer training into tank crew instruction, improving maintenance procedures, and emphasizing the tactical importance of firing while moving. These recommendations influenced post-war American tank development, but were not fully implemented immediately. The post-war years saw American tank design initially move away from stabilization. The M26 Pershing, M46 Patton, and M47 Patton tanks deployed in the late 1940s and early 1950s lacked gun stabilization. The institutional memory of the Sherman's stabilizer faded as veterans left service and new crews trained on unstabilized tanks. This proved to be a mistake that would require correction in the 1960s. The Korean War, beginning in June 1950, brought Shermans back into combat. The M4A3E8 variant, the final evolution of the Sherman design, equipped American and South Korean tank units facing North Korean and Chinese armor. These Shermans retained their stabilizers. Many had been in storage since 1945. Maintenance issues were common. But American tank crews in Korea, who took the time to make their stabilizers functional, found the same advantages Morrison and McBride had found in Europe. The ability to fire while moving provided tactical flexibility. North Korean T-34, 85 tanks, excellent vehicles by Soviet design, lacked stabilization. In engagements where American Shermans used their stabilizers effectively, they achieved favorable exchange ratios despite facing numerically superior enemy forces. The lesson should have been obvious. Stabilization mattered, but the lesson had to be relearned because institutional knowledge had been lost. The British, who had largely ignored the Sherman stabilizer during World War II, developed their own stabilization technology for post-war tanks. The Centurion tank, entering service in 1945, featured the first two-plane stabilization system on a production tank. Both gun elevation and turret traverse were stabilized. British engineers had recognized that the principle was sound, even if American implementation had been imperfect. Soviet designers, who had experimented with stabilizers during the war but never deployed them in quantity, introduced the STP-1 stabilizer on the T-54A in 1954. Soviet doctrine evolved to incorporate firing on the move. The experience of Korean War tank combat, where mobile engagements at close range were common, influenced this doctrinal shift. German tank design, interrupted by the war's end, resumed in the 1950s with the Leopard 1. German engineers incorporated lessons from analyzing captured wartime tanks, including Shermans. The Leopard 1 featured modern stabilization technology. German doctrine, freed from the constraints of 1940s thinking, now emphasized mobility and rapid engagement. The capability that American engineers had pioneered in 1941 and American tankers had mastered through unauthorized training by 1944 became standard on main battle tanks by the 1960s. Every modern tank incorporates stabilization as fundamental technology. The principle the Sherman demonstrated, that accurate fire while moving provides decisive tactical advantage, is now universally accepted. But the path from innovation to adoption was neither direct nor simple. The Sherman stabilizer remained controversial throughout its service life. Too complex for the average crew, according to critics. Too difficult to maintain under field conditions. Not worth the training burden. These criticisms had merit when crews lacked proper instruction and maintenance was neglected. They had no merit when crews received adequate training and maintenance was performed correctly. The difference was not the technology. The difference was institutional support for using the technology properly. The veterans who had learned to use the stabilizer through informal instruction, through unauthorized training sessions conducted in French fields and Italian valleys, through experimentation and shared knowledge, proved what was possible. They demonstrated that the Sherman possessed a capability other tanks lacked. They proved that this capability provided genuine tactical advantage. And they did this despite their own army's failure to teach them properly. The The security classification that surrounded the gyrostabilizer system during the war was motivated by legitimate concerns. American engineers had developed sophisticated technology that provided advantage. Preventing enemy forces from capturing complete technical documentation made sense, but the classification also prevented proper training of American crews. The cost of this security was measured in tank crews who never learned to use equipment that might have saved their lives. The illegal training that spread through American armored units from 1943 through 1945 was illegal only in the technical sense that it violated security regulations. Morally, ethically, and practically, teaching combat crews to use life-saving equipment was the correct action. The veterans who conducted this training, men like Morrison and Chen and Kowalski, violated regulations to save lives and improve combat effectiveness. After the war, none of them were punished for these violations. No court-martial proceedings addressed unauthorized disclosure of classified stabilizer information. The Army quietly acknowledged that practical necessity had overridden bureaucratic rules. Combat effectiveness mattered more than security classifications. The legacy of the Sherman's stabilizer extends beyond its tactical impact. The story illustrates how technology alone provides no advantage unless crews understand how to use it. The Sherman possessed revolutionary capability from 1941 onward. That capability remained largely unused until veteran crews figured out through experience what their training had failed to teach them. The story also illustrates how institutional conservatism can prevent adoption of new capabilities. German tank doctrine rejected firing on the move so thoroughly that German engineers never seriously attempted to develop stabilization technology, even when confronted with evidence that American tanks possessed it. Doctrine was more powerful than evidence. Belief was more influential than observation. American doctrine was more flexible but still resistant. Even after stabilizers proved effective in combat, institutional support for the technology remained inconsistent. Training remained inadequate. Maintenance remained neglected in many units. The capability existed but was not fully exploited because institutions moved slowly. Individual initiative bridged the gap. Veterans who learned through experience taught others. Maintenance crews who figured out proper procedures shared that knowledge. Tank commanders who saw tactical advantage advocated for it within their units. The capability spread through personal networks and informal instruction, not through official channels. This pattern, where innovation diffuses through informal networks despite institutional resistance, repeats throughout military history. New tactics, new technologies, new capabilities emerge from combat experience. Veterans recognize what works. They teach others. Eventually, institutions catch up and formalize what veterans already know. The Sherman's gyrostabilizer followed this pattern. Pioneering crews in North Africa and Italy figured it out. They taught others. Knowledge spread through units. By war's end, the capability was widely used if not universally adopted. Post-war analysis confirmed what veterans knew. The system worked. And then the knowledge was lost because institutional memory faded. The Korean War had to reteach lessons that World War II veterans already knew. Modern tank design eventually incorporated what the Sherman had demonstrated, but the path was neither direct nor efficient. On October 7, 1944, when Sergeant James McBride's crew destroyed that German Panther while moving at 12 miles per hour, they demonstrated capability that German tank doctrine insisted was impossible. The Germans never adapted because they never believed American claims about stabilized fire. They attributed American success to numerical superiority, air support, artillery advantage. All true factors, but incomplete explanations. The tactical advantage of firing accurately while moving was real. American crews who mastered this capability proved it in combat. German crews who faced stabilizer-equipped Shermans discovered it too late to matter. By the time German intelligence understood what they faced, the war was ending and Germany lacked resources to respond. The story of the Sherman stabilizer is ultimately a story about the human factor in military technology. Equipment alone changes nothing. Sophisticated systems provide no advantage if crews cannot use them properly. Training matters more than technology. Maintenance. matters more than design specifications. Individual initiative matters more than institutional doctrine. The men who learned to make the Sherman stabilizer work, who taught others despite security classifications, who maintained the system despite maintenance burdens, who used it in combat despite doctrinal hesitation, transformed a theoretical capability into practical advantage. They did this through persistence, ingenuity, and willingness to violate rules when rules prevented effective action. Their achievement was not dramatic. No single battle was won solely because of stabilizer use. No German surrender resulted from facing stabilized fire. The impact was cumulative, incremental, persistent. Engagement after engagement. American crews who used their stabilizers effectively achieved hits more quickly, survived encounters that might have killed them, completed missions that might have failed. Across thousands of engagements, this incremental advantage accumulated into significant tactical success. The Germans never developed comparable capability. They never adapted their doctrine to counter it. They never understood what advantage they faced until after the war, when captured German officers analyzed American tank technology and recognized what they had missed. The lesson remains relevant. Technology provides potential. Training and maintenance convert potential into capability. Individual initiative and informal knowledge sharing often accomplish what official institutions fail to achieve, and sometimes the most significant advantages are the ones the enemy never recognizes until too late to matter. The Sherman's gyrostabilizer represented one of the most significant technological advantages of World War II armored warfare, not because of what it could do theoretically, but because of what combat crews learned to do with it practically. The capability existed from 1941. The tactical advantage emerged gradually as veterans figured out how to use it properly and taught others despite institutional barriers. By 1945, American armored forces possessed an advantage German forces never matched, not because Germany lacked engineering capability, but because German doctrine rejected the underlying concept. The Germans never adapted because they never believed adaptation was necessary. American tanks should not be able to fire accurately while moving. That this belief was wrong mattered less than that the belief was deeply held. And so the war ended with American Sherman crews routinely doing what German doctrine insisted was impossible, using technology their own army had barely taught them to operate, maintaining systems their training had inadequately explained, achieving tactical success through individual initiative and unauthorized instruction. The men who made this possible never received medals for teaching classified information without authorization. Their achievement was too quiet, too technical, too far from the dramatic narratives of battlefield valor. But their contribution was real and significant. They transformed the Sherman from a good tank into a better one, not through engineering changes, but through understanding how to use what they already had. That lesson, that capability matters more than potential and understanding matters more than design specifications, remains as relevant now as it was in 1944, when Sergeant McBride's crew fired that moving shot and proved what the Germans said could not be done. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.